Before I speak of this tale, I must warn thee of the terrors which hath been writ of. Horrors of the flesh, be it mutation or gore and soul horror, follow, as does the depravity of apathy and the deprivations of the wilds on the human body. Hail and well met to the reader of this tale. This tale is titled The Coming of Tzurakhan, the Bull Slayer, and was transcribed by Ventures League scribe Asenscia, she, her, as was recounted by a refugee from the Kitsune Dynasty, Aiman, he, him. This transcript is written to the best memory and ability of the scribe. To all who read this record, be mindful of the horrors of the flesh and mutagenic, visceral, and soul forms, as well as the depravity of apathy and the deprivations of the wilds upon the human body. Hearken these words and remember them for all those that were, are, and shall be. The harvest had come in of grains for bread and the tubers that grow in the irrigated swampland along the coast of the inland sea where the Kitsune Dynasty is located. I was one of the farmers who helped pick the crop and handed it to the processors. He was retilling the field, allowing for the wounded earth to begin healing in preparation for the cold months ahead and the rebirth to follow when the news had come. Lu Han, another farmer, rushed to the central patch and beckoned every person to come near. The half-blind goblin human began speaking frantically. A new king from beyond the sea comes from far north, beyond where the Cormacs go, and brings with him cold and death like no other has done before. The king is tall and strong and rides a blue ox wreathed in shadow who could kill a person by looking at them and thus freezing their very blood in their veins. The short messenger blurted out. Some of the words I had to fill in and rationalize. If word had spread to the farmers beyond the city like he was, then the imperial legions would be marching from the south to conscript or go further afield for aid from the successors. The Cormacs had united again under the banner of a new warlord from the mythical icy tundra. The tale of the blue ox whose gaze could freeze blood horrified them all, for such a beast could exist as a mutant bestowed gifts by immortals to the delight of its rider. I and the other farmers solemnly and quickly finished tilling the fields for next year's seeding before they returned to their homes in the rising gloom of night. He sat next to his partner and their father as they all ate food together. The topic of conversation between mouthfuls of bread and ale was of the oncoming horde riding from the north. In no living or recorded memory had Cormacs ever raided this close to the cold season. They moved their herds southwards, yes, but always to the coast or to another area that the Kitsune Dynasty was unaware of. Conquest seemed the only logical goal of the coming people. If they were fleeing, it would have been noted that many people would be following them, but there was no indication of it. What made its way from the north was an army bent upon destruction and pillaging. The next day, an iron-clad warrior, bedecked in the scale mail and fox furs of the Kitsune army, entered the village. I never knew whom the recruiters and messengers were, for they were always new and never came to settlements like I, save to collect taxes every few years. The brute human rode atop a boar rhinoceros and pulled out a scroll. They opened their mouth to reveal a collection of silver-plated teeth. By order of the One Majesty, all persons between the ages of 18 and 30 are called to serve in the army of the Fox, the soldier declared. They stayed still atop their furred beast, waiting for the villagers to muster the garrison expected of them. So it was that I and 24 of his fellow villagers followed the soldier along the path to war. For a day and night they traveled northwesterly. It was on the second day that I had gone far beyond his past sojourns. The wide, sweeping plains of his village were gone, giving way to the rocky foothills and the extreme edge of the Egg Mountain ranges, which, he was once told by a passing merchant, encased the world north and west of the world. Somewhere beyond the ocean lay the eastern and southern portion, I thought. More stone than he had ever seen in one area began to form a steep walkway. Only by the differences in texture and color could some semblance of a pathway worn into the stone by thousands of feet be seen. The rider atop their boar rhinoceros did not look back save to tell the band to forage for food in the nearby patches of shrubbery, or about minor dangers in the terrain ahead. When any of Ai's fellows attempted to speak, the soldier turned and thwacked them atop the head with a long rod capped by a bronze fist. The further they traveled, the higher the slopes got, until Ai was practically climbing up an angle so steep he was flabbergasted by the bulky beast, or its rider, that did not stumble to the ground below. Fear gripped Ai's heart as he looked over the edges of the pathway to see the growing drop. A stone tumbled off the path. 30 seconds it took for any of them to hear a clatter. The band stopped, sensing danger. Slowly, they shuffled back, making whimpering and frightened sounds as they did so. The boar rhinoceros stopped, and its rider had turned around to look at them. "We continue on," he bellowed. Ai and his companions shuffled faster until they could lift up their knees in an awkward motion. "We continue on, or I will use force to drive you," the warrior shouted. Every one of them let out a shout of fear before quickly shuffling. The villager next to Ai, a potter, Yu Yun, stumbled and nearly fell off the side of the rock. Ai grabbed hold of his leg before pulling him up. The gravel of the pathway embedded itself in the folds of their clothing as they shimmied down, causing small tears and rips in their skin that stung. The warrior grunted and tapped the arse of the beast twice. The beast grunted and began walking backwards, fast. With practiced ease, its bulk galloped in reverse down the hill. In moments, its incredible bulk was on them. A sickening crunch filled the silent air as one of the beast's flat feet crushed another villager's back where it connected to the arm. A cry of pain was cut short by the whole weight of the beast ending, slamming onto the victim, crushing their skull, no doubt. A crack, the rod's fist walloped another person before it smacked Ai's cheek, leaving a large bruise on him and swelling up the underside of his eye. "We march!" the soldier shouted. With the tap on the beast's side, it got up, revealing the crushed remnants of Io Mu, a farmer like Ai. The lot of them began moving in time with haste up the path. A short prayer was spoken for Io before his body was ordered to be tossed off the cliff. The loose gore fluttered out of his body like a dark jam before it hit the rocks below and split open. Carrion beasts already began to descend on the cadaver, hungry for flesh. Ai gulped as he made his way up the steep path, knowing the strike on his face was likely a mercy. After some time, Ai slowly rose to his weakened and battered knees, swollen red from all the crawling he did. His weary legs shook as he continued up the mountain path. The villagers all clung to the rock wall like babes would to their parents' leg. All of them prayed for death now, as the grasslands below were swallowed by the white gray of cloud banks. The group marched on at the pace of the boar rhinoceros. A quick cry of surprise and help followed a growing quietness as another village, Metan, fell to their death. The soldier did not care. In their eyes was a deadness and anger that could have only been born from the ravages of war. Everyone in Ai's group was nothing more than a body to the mounted warrior, a sack of muscle that would be used to stem the tide of throat-singing demons who rode to pillage and violate the lands of peace and prosperity. This is why the Kitsune, the beasts of tricks and wisdoms, had condemned them to such a sacred duty. They were mortal, and mortals bleed where immortals cannot. 4 days and 3 nights passed since Ai and his fellows were rounded up from their homes and forced to march. As they descended, the sight of gray and rocks was still omnipresent, and no sign of greenery could be seen for miles. In the distance, a low murmur and the crash of waves could be heard. The clouds parted to reveal a large cliffside camp. Orange and white banners with a blue fox whipped wildly in the coastal winds. Hundreds, maybe even thousands of persons were assembled. Beasts of all kinds were kept in stone stables as supply wagons loaded up their goods and rolled further on the path. The mounted warriors stopped and tapped the bronze fists of their rod against the mountain. "Go there and you will be made soldiers. May you survive this war and find peace." The villagers eyed the path back. They could make it. They could, each thought. If they dropped everything, they could run like the swift deer mink. Then the thought of the crushed villager, Iomin, being crushed by the beasts, spurred their legs towards the camp. Each of them bowed their heads as they passed the soldier who ascended the slopes again, likely to find more unfortunate villagers to be conscripted. In the air was a salty and cool taste none of them had ever experienced before. I fluttered his eyes closed to guard against the winds, and spat out the taste of salt on his delicate lips. In response to the cold, the farmer huddled his arms together. A similarly armored group of 4 soldiers grabbed them all before directing them to a table under a stained white tent flittering with gilded threads. The primogenitus human at the head of the table had a long, thin mustache dangling from their lips, and a flat cap of authority with the black beads of rule dangling in front of their face, obscuring almost every feature save for the facial hair. "The villagers of Rojishi. Assign them to Myohanji," the officer grunted to a subordinate next to them. A blue robe-clad administrator bowed and led them. They were a stocky person, whose clothes hung tightly to their flesh as the chill winds carried seawater. Whether curves or muscles, I could not tell, but he knew that to attack them would be foolhardy. Innumerable soldiers went about their daily business. The small metallic fire barrels cackled as meats were grilled atop them. Some soldiers brushed on a thick yellowish paste, Rusan, the villager's well-traveled auric human merchant, recognized as rendered fat from a shrimp seal. They slathered it on their tents and clothes. Further out, priests stood holding large vessels to the wind, chanting hymns to storm immortals. Other soldiers inspected and prepared their weapons, bows, chung, naginata, ji, and hand cannons or muskets. None of them seemed affected by the cold winds or the splatter of water. "You sons of dogs are not worthy of being foxes!" a barking tone cried out, followed by a hoarse cough and belch. A hunched, acephalous human staggered towards the villagers with a naginata in one hand and a bronze fist rod in the other. "I am Myohanji, commander of the 8th Regiment of the Sangwa farmer soldiers, of which you are some," they them. "I have served the One Majesty for 25 years, and my soldiers have not let any barbarians pass. You are my soldiers now. You will not let any barbarians pass. I am Myohanji, commander of the 8th Regiment of the Sangwa Farms, and I have spoken, and my word is final," they barked out before inhaling deeply and spitting out bile. From the tents came soldiers clad in white clothes and overlapping iron plates on tanned cowhides. Through a series of shouts, a rabble of soldiers split the villagers into separate groups. A thick human and a barman human forced I's limbs apart from his body while they took measurements with a marked string. Their touch was rough, uncaring, like a bully striking at the weak before they were taught empathy. Insults were slurred or shouted at I quickly before he, Na Min, and Ya Mu were tossed into a tent. The 3 of them looked at each other with the same expression of fear on their faces. Ya Mu's eyes welled with tears as he remembered the death of his sibling. That night was quieter than most. Only the sobs of the frightened and confused reminded I that this torment was not his alone. Morning came too soon, the winds whipping up painful pellets of cold seawater. I's skin shriveled from the salt permeating the air. Water was a commodity as much as the copper coins bet in dice games. Morning meals included soggy bread, pork that was cooked black, and water that was slightly less saltier than the air. All other meals included the same, with the occasional beer. Training was hard, especially in the morning when the dew of the air made the rocks blue and slick. For the first few days, I fell every few steps and gained enough bruises to last a lifetime. Drills for the wielding of the G and bows interlaced with formation and movement patterns took up most of the day. I looked at his shivering hands. They were red and white from grifting the half of the G so tightly. Tiny splinters lodged themselves into his hands' creases, making every motion agonizing until he pulled them out with his teeth. The only thing the medical staff came around to aid were broken bones, open wounds, and the necrotic green rot that infected the feet of those who did not change their wet wraps or apply crushed ash and honey mixtures. I saw 5 of his fellow villagers be afflicted with it. It smelled horrible, and every tent where a person was held couldn't wait for drills. Such greatness there was in the knowledge every day that drew closer would be one where their strength would be tested. The cold winds hardened their souls as much as the constant shouts from fellow soldiers or Hanji did. Atop horse would their foe be found. The Cormag learned to ride in the saddle before they walked. Even with more powerful beasts to ride, the horse was favored as their immortals rode them. Mio Hanji told stories before every day's drills of their comrades being stuck with arrows or being ridden down. Hanji was once ridden down, their spine broken. It was the battle they earned their promotion for killing 2 Cormag riders with a G with a broken spine. They were saved from total disability by a skilled surgeon. The story of not feeling arrows entering their legs as the riders strafed past them filled I with dread.
There are more of them than there are of you, so never think you are safe. Hold your G high, and let the soldiers with range unleash their volleys. You are their line of defense. Your armor will stop many of the arrows, but some may strike you. If you are not dead, do not fall, for the Cormag will see that as weakness, and they will tie ropes upon you and drag you upon the earth. The flesh will be scraped until you bleed to death or are stuck with many arrows. If a comrade dies, the person in front will push their corpse in front of them and take the position. This will create secondary boundaries between you and the riders. There will be death, and your attackers will not care, nor must you until the end when the dead are buried. Remember this, and fear will not taint your thoughts.
Hanji's words repeated in Ai's mind constantly as the rows of orange and white-clad soldiers descended the mountain and marched for half a day to an impasse where the sea lay to their east and the mountains to their west. A string of bellowing calls from cave beasts heralded the Cormags. I had heard of the beasts that slumbered in the caves of the mountains, large, slovenly trumpeting things of fur and flesh. He had also heard of the Cormag, the mountain warriors, who knew only pillaging and conquest. It was his ancestral duty to defend the south from the barbarian hordes of the north, they who worshipped the things they rode and who are the greatest plight to all of the world. Rows and columns formed up 42 abreast with 2 rows of G-wielding warriors and behind them 2 archers and 1 handgunner. Scouts had rode a day and a half ago, reporting where they stood now is where the Cormag would travel. I felt the earth tremble first. This was not the trembling of his knees nor the cold chill running through him. All of his bones clattered in his flesh, ready to jump out of his skin and run back home. Thousands of harmonic growls, unifying into a war song, filled the air. The hordes of barbarians turned the corner in their dozens, by scores and by magnitudes.
At their front rode heavily armored warriors who drew their recurved bows and loosed arrows randomly. Some faltered from their position but were held back in place by their comrades. A volley of shot and arrows were returned, striking a few dead, causing their horses to turn on the heel and return to the oncoming horde. Another volley and another came from the plated warriors. Some G soldiers were felled dead, and more barely held themselves up. The dead were pushed forward onto the rocks as instructed. The armor and clamor of battle rattled out. Water splashes came from the east. The heavy riders trudged through the cool surf to set forth a few arrows before drawing their sabers and charging. Even with the cold water slowing them and a wall of polearms and shot before them, the Cormag did not stop. A war cry escaped their lips. Ker-crack went the black powder weapons. At the front, the shuffle of soldiers pressed forward. Lighter warriors loosed arrows and awkwardly wheeled about in the water, only to be shot down if their mount became startled. The arrows slid off or broke against the armor I and his fellow fox soldiers wore. The wall of sound and bodies charging towards them did not stop, even as return missiles were sent with deadly accuracy. A horde was a conglomeration of force, each warrior, not a soldier. Their training was born from the hunt and clan rivalry. Before I knew it, he and his regiment were face to face with a fur-hatted Cormag. Their horses were bare but sleek and strong. Only the riders wore thick woolen and fur-lined armor. The commanders wore darkened iron plate and scales, their helms decorated with dye horsehair plumes. Each face was filled with bloodlust and confidence until it fell from death. Bodies lined the waters and pathways full of arrows. I held his G high and strong. An arrow struck the warrior closest to him in the throat, lodging itself in their esophagus. The soldier continued walking before falling and looking up as if nothing had happened before the ceaseless, confused blinking stopped. Then, a soldier from behind strained to push the cadaver forward before lifting high their own G and shouting at the Cormags, who still sang from their throats menacingly. The oncoming horde faltered and retreated, staying in the surf or holding back their braying mounts. The horde began making a low praise before opening. A shaggy black bovid beast trudged through the berth, its aura of strength deserved. Atop the large, smelling thing were two curved horns unlike any I beheld on a bovid. It grunted softly, but still thrashed its head at any horse too close. Atop of it was a squat, stunted human Cormag, dressed in white fur-lined regalities. On their shoulder was the skinned head of a wolf-like beast with smooth, mottled gray skin. The warrior held aloft a mighty ivory axe made from the bone of a kill. The dull-faced warrior lurched forward on their steed and pulled out a tether of heads. Each pallid head was frozen in agony. With a graceful toss, the warrior let the heads go. By the glittering gold woven into the plain clothes and simple armors, the message was clear. Tzurakhan was here. The raging bull roared loudly and began charging. In response to the bellows, the riders hard-pressed their horses into the water until the beasts were up to their necks in the chill waters. It mattered not to them, for this far south the water was warm and offered little terrors. Their mounties, meanwhile, continued to loose arrow after arrow, volley after volley into the Kitsune forces, whose shot lost the momentum to be accurate at the distance, and whose less powerful bows failed in acquiring the range needed to hit the warriors. Though their steeds remained stalwart, the archers began to shiver as they stayed in the shallow waters. All at once, the riders began aiming at a row of ranged warriors who fell by the score and nearly to a person. The horde rode their horses closer to the gap, which was plugged with the bodies of the dead. A look of fierce determination streaked across the Cormag's face before they charged the shore into a wall of G. The large bovid charging towards the 8th Regiment of the Sangwa farms grunted hard as its hoofsteps cracked the stone underneath. Tzurakhan drew a sword and lowered a lance with murderous intention. In seconds, a line of heavy lancers joined their warlord, who smashed into the front rank of Ai's comrades, crushing some under hoof. The momentum of the creature slowed as the weight it trampled struck it. The horses similarly slowed down after they rammed and jumped the front rank. I could only move without thinking from all the chaos around him. He thrusted and held his foot position while horses cried and the large ox battered any defiance. Mortals and beasts alike screamed for the carnage to stop, but it was no use. The immortals of war demanded blood be shed, no matter how it must be spilled in the din of battle. Ai's G thrummed in his hands as he realized the end of the polearm struck into the belly of a warrior in the space without protection. Confidently, I pulled back and continued to stab and swing at any oncoming enemies. Survival instinct took over, blurring everything in sight and muffling their words. Ai's eyes twitched and rolled side to side as they scanned for danger unconsciously. Tzurakhan swung a sword down onto the skull of some poor villager. Blood splattered far and onto Ai's face. It was at this distance that I could see the foul-smelling beast's coarse fur was tied together with tiny pieces of black leather and ivory beads. None of that mattered. I thrust his blade into the shoulder of a charging warrior and shouted something halfway between a word and a bark. Fear coursed through his veins, but was outpaced by the lust for battle and survival as he unknowingly shoved the blade of his weapon into the skull of a light warrior's horse, causing the creature to stumble. G was without a weapon, for the collapse of the beast took his G with it. Out of the corner of his eye something glimmered, and his hand instinctually felt around for it in the pile of still warm cadavers. He whimpered frightfully before drawing a short sword and huddling back to the line of fire. No matter how tired I and his fellows got, the Cormac had a rider fresh with arrows and bloodlust to strike one of them down. In the confusion, I was struck by an oncoming beast, further confusing his memory and coherency. I felt a hand pull his ponytail and tug. The shock to his system was enough to delay a response to the Cormac above him, awkwardly swinging their saber down on the soldier. They were a halfling human, was all I could recall. The saber edge bounced harmlessly off his armor to the frustration of the rider. The line behind them had been broken, allowing for a rider or two to enter the fray in a split-second decision. I fell to the ground and grabbed a broken G-pole, causing the Cormac to have splintered end enter their chest from the sheer force of impact. I howled in success before scrambling back to the line. The ranks formed up again, now a barely held line of spears held high between archers and gunners, buttressed against the piles of the dead. Tzurakhan proudly cleaved down any soldier straggling about, riddled with arrows limply hanging out of their armor. The riders began to retreat at the orders of their warlord. Shortly after, a rushing line of foot warriors charged. The first three ranks fell to the volley of shot and arrows before they were halfway to the line. Another rank fell, and then they were upon the army with slashing blades and spears. The barbarians grabbed hold of the raged warriors, dragging them about before finally ending them with a powerful cut or stab. Some fell to the G, arrayed before them, but where one fell, another would take their place, and a second crawled underneath the row to attack the line. Some trudged in the cold waters and attempted to flank. It proved a folly as the gunners unleashed a crackling round. I shouted as he was unable to form cohesive words to express his fears. The weight of stabbing a person hit the hardest with the dismounted warriors. He watched as the bloodied end of his G cut and pierced thick woolen clothes and into tight flesh. The warriors screamed and cringed with pain before they fell. Withdrawing the blade was as heavy as sinking into the body. "Thrust! Thrust!" Hanji commanded. Ai's minute soldiery took hold as he thrust his G into the line. He thrusted every time Hanji commanded. The warriors reeled back in pain, then found themselves stuck again. This was not meant to kill. These blows were meant to wound and bleed out any fire within the Cormag. The screams of the dying grew more numerous, and the piles of the dead turned the surf a deep crimson brown, created a field of writhing, heavy cadavers. Cormags dragged away as many as they could. Only the outermost truck could be hauled away, as moving any closer would accrue a wound by the incessant gunners. Arrows from the other side fell like rain striking randomly. I stumbled, tired from the battle as it drew to a lull. Water. He needed water, not encrusted by stinging salt and food that did not sit in his stomach. Every blink was slow and sputtery. Never had such an ache been felt before. I heaved loudly with every other soldier. No doubt the Cormag, too, grew tired, their relentless assault slowing. Fewer warriors turned the bend to rush the lines of infantry until eventually the horde stopped coming at all. Observing soldiers saw the army of the Khan routing towards another pathway south, which would cost them much time and energy to traverse. The battle was won. I and a few other soldiers who maintained their line searched through the bodies of the dead Cormags, though on occasion you would find some Kitsune coins that the raiders must have taken in raids of yesteryear. Carrion beasts flew overhead, waiting for the majority of soldiers to disperse from the ghastly feast. Carts full of eyes, comrades in arms, were hauled off to be sent back to their homes or otherwise buried en masse in catacombs. After some time, a few Cormags came to, unarmed, and similarly put a few dead within. The grim task was a silent one. Every step, either Kitsune Dynasty or Cormag warrior got too close, they stood straight up and stared each other down silently. Neither malice or vengeance flared in either's eyes before they returned to the task. The bodies in the water were too far gone. Scavengers had started picking apart the bodies. It was now a task of beating them back to retrieve armor or weapons. Priests walked the field, too, administering rites of death sufficient enough to ensure an afterlife was met. A priest for the Cormags too showed, bedecked in furs and antlers with just as many strings, beads, and fetishes hanging off them. They beat a drum and uttered a guttural prayer before departing. The eternal blue sky had witnessed their honorable deaths and would grant them grace. I would serve for another 5 months. Bitter cold did not affect Tzurakhan and the assembled forces. Of these times, I would remember great pain and tragedy before he returned to Rojishi with 6 others of his village. Some stayed in the army, but most died on campaign. Transcription ends. The writing of war is one of the few sources the Archivus Historiae has of the invasion of Tzurakhan from Tithiari to Chaosiari in 4968 AR, whose title was incorrectly translated to mean Bull Slayer instead of Bull Dominator. We know now from Archivus Venturis and second-hand accounts that Tzurakhan was most likely one from the frozen steppes which border the land of the people of snow, an enigmatic ethno-cultural group only seen by the Skandish Wild Sea and some Cormags. The bull most likely refers to a species of musk oxen able to be ridden. After a harsh winter campaign that saw Tzurakhan raid the Kitsune Dynasty's lowlands,
The warlord was eventually slain by Yo-Un Takiro in a cavalry duel. The Khan's army dispersed and took to plundering or fleeing quickly before the month of chaos began. 5 investigations have been launched into the Archivus Venturis records. See writings entitled On Tzurakhan, On the Cormags, and On North Occidentalis for more. And to all who were, are, and shall be that read this account, glory to you. Tales of Mortality is a world-building podcast set in the world of Asenscia, created and owned by Bard over 18 years and counting. It is a fantasy world of horror and madness, a planet racked by mutation and magic, where humanity survives only through itself and the Spirit Indomitable against horrors natural and unnatural. The Worldbuilder, writer, producer, and artist of the thumbnail is Bard. Me! Below is a transcription of lore, as well as a link to my Instagram, Bard of the Mad Realm, where I share art related to Asenscia. Thank you all for listening to Tales of Mortality. May chaos reign. Bye-bye.